I'm a big lover of vintage watches, but to say that vintage watches are for every single type of watch enthusiast probably is a stretch, considering just the costs that go into servicing them and just the obscurity of a lot of the pieces that people are looking for nowadays. But with this demand on vintage styled watches, there's a lot of brands that are answering that call. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at some affordable options under $500 of watches that are vintage inspired. Now, our first watch on the list here today is from Timex, and when a lot of people consider Timex, I feel the Timex Marlin is the first watch to come to mind. I'm not going to be looking at that watch just because I feel like I mention it so frequently on the channel. I've done a complete review on it as well. I'll link to that in the description if you do want to check it out. But instead, we're going to be looking at their archive line. And the Timex archive line has a lot of different variations, different models that you can choose from, and they're all really affordable watches for the most part. But we're going to be looking at a collaboration with Todd Snyder and Timex. And the watch here is their Timex Beekman. So these watches come in with a $150 price, case size of 40 millimeters, case thickness of 12 millimeters, have a quartz movement here, water resistance of 30 meters, and has an acrylic crystal. So these watches are influenced from automobiles and of course are very vintage inspired just based on the dial design. They come with both a black and white variation, and I've just been a big fan of these Todd Snyder collabs with Timex, and this was one noteworthy one. But again, just check out the entire archive line from Timex, as there's a lot of really cool options if you're looking for affordable, vintage-inspired designs. Now for our next watch, we have Seiko. So we're starting with two major brands here, but we'll move into some more obscure models and we'll finish it off with some more mainstream models at the end. So just to kind of give you some context here. But for the Seiko watch that we're looking at, it's a member of the Recraft series, a line all dedicated to bringing back a lot of 20th century designs for the 21st century. And the one that we're going to be looking at here today is the Seiko SNK M97. So this watch comes in with a price of $115 to $250. Quite a bit of variation here. I see it sold out in a lot of different places, but you can find them. Case size of 43.5 millimeters, case thickness of 11.4 millimeters. Movement is an automatic Seiko 7S26, water resistance of 50 meters, and has a Hardlex crystal. So we're looking at a 41-hour power reserve with this thing, and the line has a bit to offer, just that Recraft series that I was referring to at the beginning. Many embodying that late 60s and 70s era when Seiko was truly disrupting the Swiss watch industry. And this particular model comes with that green dial, has that vignetting of the dial as well, and looks totally retro. I really like this model, and I think it's a good option for those that want something a little bit more classic from Seiko, especially that kind of epitomizes that 60s, 70s era with just the case design, and I think it's a really cool option. Okay, so now we have a series of watches that might be a little bit more obscure. And when I mentioned at the beginning of the video how there's a true demand for vintage inspired watches, I think the people that are answering the call most are not the major brands, but a lot of micro brands out there. And I've done a whole series on micro brands, and I will link to those in the description down below if you want to check them out. Those seem to be really well received, but let's look at some different models here. First, starting off with Spinnaker with their Hall model. So this watch comes in with a price of $250, case size of 42 millimeters, thickness of 12 millimeters, powered by an automatic Seiko NH35, water resistance of 100 meters, and has an acrylic crystal. So when I asked the Facebook group for suggestions on watches to be mentioned in this particular range, Spinnaker was one of the few brands that was mentioned quite a bit. And when looking at this model, clearly there's a lot of vintage inspiration. Certainly a lot. I see a good amount of Panerai here with this model, but overall it looks like Spinnaker is really dedicating to this type of era, this type of design, thinking a lot about just vintage inspired pieces and answering that call for a lot of consumers that are looking for more affordable options. And for the money here, I think it's a pretty solid option. So next up, we have a micro brand that I mentioned in our micro brand series. I believe it was in part 2 that I mentioned them, and that is Lorier. We looked at their Neptune model, which is a great vintage inspired diver watch, but instead of looking at that watch here, we're looking at their Falcon watch, which is a really interesting design, kind of that everyday type aesthetic, and is certainly vintage inspired, like many of the pieces from the brand. Case size is 39 millimeters, case thickness 11.6 millimeters, powered by an automatic Seiko NH35A, water resistance of 200 meters, and has a plexiglass crystal. Lorier is based in New York City, owned and operated by a husband and wife, Lorenzo and Lauren Ortega, and seem to be very candid about their appreciation for vintage watches. But this watch really struck me as a really awesome everyday watch. Vintage inspired hands and a sweet waffle dial style that you'll see with a lot of vintage Omegas from like the 50s and 60s. And it comes in a lot of different colors as well, and I think it does epitomize that vintage style that we're looking for here today. Okay, next up we have another really interesting micro brand with Baltic, and we're gonna be looking at their HMS001. So Baltic is a French-based micro brand that I have been a big fan of for some time now. I've made a mention of their Bicompax chronograph in the past. However, for the sake of our budget here today, we're gonna have to look at this model instead. So this model is an automatic casual 3-hand watch inspired just by the mid-20th century styling of many watches. The watch comes in several different dial colors, my personal favorites being their cream dial and then their variations of their gilt dials. The watch comes in with a price of $350 to $500 depending on where you live in the world. Movement is an automatic Miyota 821, water resistance of 50 meters, and has a Hazelite crystal. Okay, I don't want to mention this brand again or just do a deep dive into one of their pieces because I just feel like I've been mentioning them so frequently as of late, especially. I've done a whole review on their 1970s diver. It's like a super compressor diver, as well as mentioning a lot of their different chronographs and other pieces that they have in their collection. Founded by Dan Henry, a very renowned vintage watch collector, and really just the whole aim of that approach that he has with this brand is to just create vintage inspired pieces at affordable prices. So definitely check them out if you do want to do it, but didn't want to just go into them again just because I feel like I've mentioned them a lot lately. So now for our next watch, we have the Mercer Voyager 2. Another brand that I mentioned in my micro brand series, and this was one that I did not particularly mention. I mentioned their Durham model, but these watches have a bit of a more vintage aesthetic that I wanted to mention here. So this brand is based in New Jersey. It looks like they do a lot of OEM work as well, and I think that leads to a lot of their watches. What you can do is actually customize them to pretty much any degree that you want if you fill out a form on their website. But this particular model here, we're looking at a price of $469, case size of 42 millimeters, case thickness of 13.5 millimeters. Movement is an automatic Seiko NH36, water resistance of 200 meters, and has a sapphire crystal. Really like just the vintage inspired. They have that faux patina sandwich dial as well, which is really cool. And I think my favorite of all the different variations of the model is the blue dial one. Okay, so now we looked at some more obscure models that you can take a look at. Let's look at two really good options when it comes to under $500, very popular. And one's gonna be more of a dress-oriented watch, the other's gonna be more of, say, an everyday watch. And the first watch here is from Hamilton, and the watch, of course, is their Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical. But the reference that we're gonna be looking at here is a little bit different. So they're H69429901. So this is the one that comes with a brown dial and that faux patina as well. Probably one of my favorite versions of the entire Hamilton Khaki Field line. And the watch comes in with a price of $475 retail, case size of 38 millimeters, thickness of 9.5 millimeters, powered by an automatic ETA 28012, water resistance of 50 meters, and has a sapphire crystal. And then the next watch is of the dress side of things, and it's another brand underneath the Swatch umbrella, and that is Tissot. And we're gonna be looking at the Tissot Visodate Heritage. So I actually owned this watch in the past, one of them. I owned the black dial variation. I enjoyed it, it just was not getting enough wear for me to justify owning it for any longer, but a very good option for a dress-oriented watch under $500, especially a Swiss-made one. So we're looking at a price of $350 to $500. You have different dial variations, which are gonna fluctuate in price. I found the blue and the white dial variations are going to be a little bit more expensive compared to the black one. Case size of 40 millimeters, case thickness of 11.6 millimeters. Movement is an automatic ETA 28362, water resistance of 30 meters, and has a sapphire crystal. And in addition, if you do want to go for something a little bit cheaper, you like this overall design, there are quartz options available as well if you do want to check those out. So now for our next watch and our final watch, it's a watch that does fluctuate in price quite a bit, and I did find it available underneath $500 when I was looking and doing some research here, but I've always been a big fan of this model as well and of the brand itself. And when I always think of just underrated watches and thinking of brands associated with that type of terminology, I always think of Certina. And I actually did a deep dive into their history in one of my episodes looking at underrated watch brands. But the watch here we're going to be looking at is their Certina DS1 Heritage. Reference is the C029807 1603160. And I think just the look of the gold accents on the dial really allow this watch to have some type of vintage aesthetic, and I think Certina really pulls it off incredibly well with this piece. So the price here, $450 to $750. Case size is 40 millimeters, thickness is 12 millimeters, powered by an automatic Powermatic 80 movement. So it has an 80-hour power reserve. Really good value for money here from a watch that you can find for around $500 water resistance of 100 meters, and has a sapphire crystal. All right, guys, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Definitely want to hit that bell icon because YouTube's been kind of weird lately with letting you guys know when I release videos. Also, if you want to get an iconic watch for yourself, hit the link in the description. Go to Bob's Watches, a partner of the channel, one of the largest online retailers. I recently did a video interviewing their CEO, Paul, and we overviewed some of the most rare Rolex Submariner references. It's incredible. I think we had 3 watches, well over $1 million total for all 3 of the watches. So pretty cool piece. Also, if you want to check out our watch straps, head over to our website. We're going to be adding a lot more. You might be pleasantly surprised when you go to the website. Also, if you want to join our watch giveaway, which we're going to be having some amazing giveaways in the upcoming few weeks here, you want to stay up to date with that. Make sure you fill out the watch giveaway form and then follow me on Instagram. So guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.